All right, let's dive in. Today, we're taking a close look at Gabriel Delanne's Evidence for a Future Life.
Hmm.
And this book, it's not your typical afterlife exploration.
Right.
You know, Delanne, he really goes deep, methodically trying to understand
Yeah.
how immortality works
Yeah.
and this whole concept of the soul's journey.
He's very thorough.
Super thorough. Yeah, and get this, he uses historical observations, experiments with, get this, somnambulists,
Oh, wow.
and even, wait for it,
Okay.
spirit photography.
That's fascinating.
Oh, as well. It's like a blend of history, science, and the paranormal all in one.
Yeah, and what's really striking about Delanne's work is that he doesn't treat these accounts, these incredible stories, like they're just random happenings,
Yeah.
He actually connects the dots,
Yeah.
examines beliefs about the soul across different cultures and throughout history, and he traces how this idea of a second body or paraspirit, how it kind of emerged over time.
Yeah, it's like he's piecing together this global puzzle of the soul, right? Like, what did people believe and how did these concepts develop?
Exactly. He delves into ancient Egyptian beliefs about the Ka, this ethereal double that needed, sustenance in the afterlife.
Oh, interesting.
He explores Zoroaster's concept of the pharaoh, a guardian spirit assigned to each person, right?
That's it.
So all of this meticulous research, it shows that this idea of a spiritual component, something existing alongside the physical body,
Wow.
it's a common thread throughout human history.
It's fascinating how these ideas, these core beliefs, have been around for centuries, right? And Delanne, he doesn't stop there.
No, not at all.
He takes it a step further with his investigations into, well,
Mm.
somnambulism, and for our listeners who might not be familiar, it's basically sleepwalking.
Oh, right.
Why was Delanne so drawn to sleepwalkers?
Hmm.
What was it about them that fascinated him?
Well, he was particularly intrigued by the claims made by magnetizers, people who believed they could communicate with the spirit world through their somnambulist subjects.
Really?
Yeah, and this was during a time when mesmerism, this idea of using magnetic forces to influence people's actions, was a really popular concept.
So it's like a scientific mystery, right? Was it real communication or just a trick of the mind?
Exactly. Delanne wanted to know if these visions, these things the somnambulists were describing, were genuine glimpses into another realm or just the result of suggestion.
And he came across some pretty remarkable stories along the way, right?
Oh, absolutely. So many.
I'm thinking of that experiment by Dr. Billett where a blindfolded somnambulist accurately described someone's sister.
Oh, yes.
And get this, the sister was miles away, completely unaware of what was happening.
Yeah. That case, it's a prime example of how powerful these experiences could be, but it also reminds us to be critical,
Of course, of course.
I ask the tough questions.
Right.
Like how much of what the somnambulist described was actually objective reality versus, maybe some influence from the people conducting the experiment.
Right. Like, could they have unintentionally guided the somnambulist's vision?
Exactly. And Delanne himself, he recognized this challenge.
Makes sense.
He knew how important it was to have verifiable evidence.
Oh, it's like he's navigating this delicate balance, right?
Mhm.
Between these captivating stories, these accounts of the seemingly impossible, and this need for scientific rigor.
Absolutely.
And you see this careful approach in his exploration of the double phenomenon, which is where people report seeing apparitions of, get this, living people in different locations.
Yeah, that's where things start to get really interesting, right?
It really bends your mind a bit, doesn't it?
For sure.
And Delanne, he meticulously collected all these accounts of this phenomenon.
He did.
And some of them came from very credible sources.
Oh, yeah, very reputable people.
Like Goethe,
Yes.
the famous writer.
Exactly. Goethe actually described seeing an apparition of his friend. And get this, the friend was dressed in Goethe's own clothes.
Oh, wow. Okay, so it's not just seeing someone in a different place. It's like their apparition is somehow borrowing your wardrobe.
Right.
So strange.
Yeah.
How did Delanne try to explain these events?
Well, he connected them to this idea of the paraspirit, suggesting that it could temporarily detach from the physical body during sleep or, altered states of consciousness.
It's almost like an out-of-body experience, but not quite, right?
Right. Exactly. And of course, modern psychology might have different explanations for these experiences, like maybe the subconscious mind is projecting images or desires.
That makes sense.
But Delanne, he saw these accounts as further evidence for the independent existence of this second body.
So he's building his argument piece by piece,
Yes.
starting with historical beliefs, then somnambulism, now the double phenomenon.
Yeah.
And then he introduces something truly mind-blowing, spirit photography.
Now that's a game changer.
It really is, and we'll dive into that right after the break.
Sounds good. I mean, spirit photography, it just captures the imagination, doesn't it?
Absolutely. This idea that a photograph could capture something beyond our world.
Yeah, a glimpse into the afterlife, maybe?
Exactly. And remember, photography was still pretty new back then.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
So the idea that you could capture spirits, it was both fascinating and controversial.
Totally. People didn't know what to make of it.
And Delanne, he didn't just stop at stories and anecdotes.
Right.
He really dug into the experiments happening with spirit photography, didn't he?
He did. He even described experiments where they used paraffin molds to capture impressions of spirit hands.
Wow, paraffin molds. So they were really trying to get physical evidence.
Yeah, they were looking for tangible proof, something you could hold and examine.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
And what's even more interesting is that they noticed differences between these spirit hands and the hands of the mediums conducting the seances.
They did, specific details that set them apart.
So it wasn't just a vague, blurry image. They were really paying attention to the specifics.
Absolutely. They wanted to rule out any chance of trickery or simple misinterpretation.
It was all about finding concrete evidence, something you couldn't easily dismiss.
Exactly. They were looking for proof that went beyond suggestion or coincidence.
Of course, even with all those precautions, spirit photography still has its skeptics.
Of course, there's always the possibility of fraud, especially back then.
Right, and even if some photos genuinely captured something unexplained, there could be other explanations.
Absolutely. Things we haven't even thought of yet.
It's a good reminder that even with Delanne's meticulous approach, a healthy dose of skepticism is always warranted.
Agreed. It's important to approach these topics with an open mind, but also a critical eye.
But even setting aside the spirit photography for a moment, Delanne's exploration of the paraspirit itself is really intriguing.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
He didn't just accept it as some mystical idea.
No, he wanted to understand it.
He wanted to understand its properties using the scientific knowledge available at the time.
Right, he was trying to bridge that gap between the spiritual and the scientific.
Absolutely. He was a man ahead of his time in that way.
He was, and he theorized that the paraspirit was made of a subtler form of matter.
Interesting. Subtler matter. What did he mean by that?
Well, he drew comparisons to X-rays, which had been recently discovered back then.
X-ray. That makes sense. They can pass through solid objects.
Exactly, and he also talked about the concept of ether, which was a popular scientific idea at the time.
Right, the ether, this invisible substance that was thought to fill all of space.
Precisely, and Delanne believed that just like X-rays could pass through things, the paraspirit could interact with our world in ways we don't fully grasp.
It's like he was trying to find a way to explain these paranormal phenomena using the language of science.
He was, and it's what makes his work so fascinating, this constant interplay between the spiritual and the scientific.
And this leads us to one of the most mind-boggling aspects of Delanne's research: materialization.
Ah, yes, where spirit forms seemingly become solid.
Yeah, and they can interact with the physical world.
It's a concept that pushes the boundaries of what we think is possible.
Absolutely. We're talking about spirits that can be seen, touched, even spoken to.
It's truly remarkable.
And Delanne, he really dived deep into the famous case of Katie King, didn't he?
He did. Katie King was a materialized spirit who appeared in seances conducted by the medium Florence Cook.
And what makes this case so compelling is the level of detail documented by the researchers.
Oh, yeah. Very meticulous observations.
Katie reportedly held conversations, wrote letters, even allowed her pulse to be taken.
A spirit with a pulse, it challenges everything we think we know.
It really does, and some researchers even noted differences between Katie King and the medium, suggesting they were separate beings.
That's right. They observed things like weight fluctuations and distinct personalities.
It's also intriguing, but it also raises some tough questions.
It does. Like, where did the matter for Katie King's materialization come from?
Right, and what was happening to Florence Cook's body during these events?
Those are questions that still puzzle researchers today.
Delanne grappled with these mysteries too, drawing on the idea of the paraspirit and its potential to manipulate matter.
And it's this willingness to explore the unknown, to ask the hard questions, that makes Delanne's work so valuable.
He wasn't afraid to confront the mysteries, and in doing so, he opened up new avenues of thought and inquiry.
He did, and his exploration of materialization shows his commitment to investigating these claims with both an open mind and a critical eye.
It's this balance that makes his work so compelling.
Absolutely. He embraced the strangeness while still seeking evidence and reason.
And through this meticulous approach, this weaving together of history, science, and personal accounts,
Yes.
Delanne arrives at his core argument for a future life.
His central thesis, the culmination of all his research.
Exactly, and we'll explore that in detail after a quick break. It's a whole new perspective, isn't it? Death, not as the end, but as a
It's
transition.
a continuation, yeah,
And it's what makes Delanne's work still relevant today.
for sure.
This challenge to rethink how we understand consciousness.
Absolutely.
So after diving deep into Delanne's evidence for a future life, what's that one key takeaway you want our listener to hold on to?
I think Delanne really wants us to reconsider what consciousness is, how we define it.
Yeah.
If a perispirit can exist without the body, as he suggests,
Right.
it raises some really big questions about what makes us us.
Like, what is our true self?
Exactly, and what happens to that self after we die.
It's both exciting and a bit unsettling, right? To think about death not as an ending,
Yeah,
but as this transformation, this continuation.
it's a shift in perspective for sure.
It makes you think about your place in everything, in the grand scheme of things.
Totally.
If consciousness doesn't just disappear, if it keeps going, what does that mean for the soul's journey? What's the point of it all?
Big questions, no easy answers.
And Delanne tackles those questions head on. He explores reincarnation through the Spiritist lens,
Right, the idea that the soul evolves over multiple lifetimes.
learning and growing with each new incarnation.
Exactly, and Delanne doesn't present this as just a mystical belief.
Right.
He sees it as a logical consequence of what he's found about the perispirit.
So if this spiritual essence survives death,
Yeah.
then it could potentially return to a new body.
To continue evolving, to keep learning.
And this concept, it's not unique to Spiritism.
No, not at all.
It shows up in various cultures and spiritual traditions throughout history.
Reincarnation, yeah, it's a pretty widespread idea.
But Delanne, he approaches it from a more scientific and philosophical perspective.
He wants to understand it, to ground it in evidence and reason.
He's not saying this is definitely what happens.
Right.
He's saying, what if this is possible? How does it change how we understand life and death and the universe?
He's asking us to think bigger, to broaden our horizons.
To be open to possibilities we might not have considered before.
Exactly, and to explore the questions, the really big questions that come with that.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Delanne's fascinating work, I want to leave our listener with a final thought to ponder.
Right.
If Delanne's concept of the perispirit is even partially true,
Yeah.
if there's a part of us that continues after the physical body is gone, how does that change how we live our lives today?
That's a great question.
Does it affect how we approach our relationships, our goals, our own potential?
I hope that's something our listeners will really reflect on.
Because Delanne reminds us that the mysteries of consciousness, of existence, they're not solved.
Far from it.
There's so much we still don't know, so much left to explore.
Absolutely. And as we learn and grow, we might discover things that completely overturn what we thought we knew about being human and what lies beyond death.
It's a reminder that life is a journey of discovery.
It is.
And the most profound discoveries are often the ones that challenge our assumptions and expand our understanding of the universe and our place within it.
Well said.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Gabriel Delanne's thought-provoking work.
My pleasure.
We hope it sparked your curiosity and giving you some questions to ponder, some mysteries to explore.
Definitely.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.